Human history is a collection of narratives built around what has been discovered, measured, and explained. But beyond the textbooks, there is another layer: artifacts, events, and phenomena that don't fit into the overall picture. They exist, they are recorded, they are found, but it is impossible to explain them. These are not myths or rumors. These are real places, objects, and documents registered by researchers, the military, and museum collections. But when they contradict what we've already accepted as truth, they're simply put aside. They become inconvenient, not because they're fake, but because they're inappropriate. This issue features 20 stories from around the world, each of which left behind a trace, but not an answer. These are not revelations. These are not proofs. These are observations that remain on the border between the possible and the impossible. Each of them could be a mistake, or part of something that we haven't even begun to understand yet. Island of Silent Statues. The Polynesian island of Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island, remains one of the most isolated inhabited landmasses in the world. Surrounded only by the Pacific Ocean, the nearest continent is more than 2,000 kilometers away. But it is here, in the midst of absolute geographical solitude, that hundreds of stone giants, the Moai, rise. The figures, each weighing between 14 and 80 tons on average, stand silently facing the center of the island. And that is precisely the first and most important question. Why don't they look out to sea? The traditional explanation is that the statues represent deified ancestors and face inward to protect the living. But if they truly are images of ancestors, why are all the figures so stylized? Why do they have the same proportions, elongated noses, heavy brow ridges, and a complete lack of individual features? Furthermore, there is one feature that is rarely mentioned. All the statues were found face down or sunken into the ground. Only after excavation were they put upright. This means that at some point the islanders themselves knocked down or buried what they had previously considered sacred. Historians attribute this to social collapse. They say resources were depleted, internal conflicts arose, and the Moai cult fell along with the previous system. But then why were the quarries left unfinished in some places? Statues up to 20 meters long, half carved from the rock, as if the craftsmen had simply abandoned them. Another puzzling aspect is transportation. The Moai are carved from volcanic tuff, and some of them stood tens of kilometers from the quarries. None of the researchers have a single working version of how they were delivered. No logs, no animals, no wheels. The only legend is a local legend. The statues walked on their own. No details are given. In 2011, an experiment was conducted. Using ropes and a team of 18 people, they managed to move one of the replicas of the statue in a vertical position, slightly rocking it. The method worked, but only on level, safe ground, and with a weight 4 times lighter than that of the largest Moai. The architectural question also remains. Most of the statues are installed on platforms. Ahu. These platforms are made of perfectly fitted stone blocks, reminiscent of the masonry of Peru or Egypt, or mortar between the stones. Everything is assembled from the inside out. Modern engineers admit that recreating such an assembly without specialized equipment is virtually impossible. In 2018, stone circles buried under a layer of soil were discovered near one of the central platforms. One of the stones contains a carving of a spiral surrounded by dots. This symbol does not appear in known Polynesian symbolism, but has parallels in rock art on the other side of the world, in the Neolithic monuments of Scotland. So maybe the myth about the origin of the Moai is not local. There's a hypothesis that the statues aren't ancestral images, but rather transmitters or markers. Their massive size, uniform orientation, and the unique shape of their eye sockets. Perhaps all part of a system that functioned not for people, but for observation or connections. Their faces are inward, perhaps not protection, but a directional function, inward into the island, where, according to shamans, the center of the intersection of forces is located. Most of the Moai have now been restored and stand upright, but archives contain photographs from the 19th century. All the statues are lying down, faceless, eyeless, as if the island was trying to turn away from those they depicted. Official science says we simply don't know everything, and that's the honest answer. But if even on the most isolated point on Earth there's something we don't understand, maybe it's not there for us. Copper mines that shouldn't exist. Along the shores of Lake Superior, in what is now northern Michigan, lies a region known as Keweenaw. Today, it is forests, cliffs, and a few settlements. But 1,000 years before Europeans arrived, this area was one of the largest sources of copper on Earth. It is believed that indigenous tribes mined metal here for barter and to make simple tools. However, the volume of the resource extracted casts doubt on the scale of this explanation. By the most conservative estimates, at least 500,000 tons of pure copper were extracted from local mines, long before the industrial era. But the strangest thing begins when you analyze the details. 15 meters deep have been found in the rocks, with perfectly vertical walls and traces of systematic mining. Stone and copper tools are found along the edges. Some mines lead into horizontal tunnels reinforced with beams. The copper has been almost completely removed, but not a single worker's burial remains, not a single permanent settlement commensurate with the scale of the mining, not a single processing center on site. The main question arises: who exactly was doing the mining? Supporters of the official version claim that this was the work of tribes that predated the Anishinaabe. But the indigenous peoples themselves claim that the mines were already old when their ancestors arrived. Local legend tells of people who came from the north, mined copper, leaving almost nothing behind, and disappeared as suddenly as they appeared. Another mystery: where did the copper go? If we're talking about 500,000 tons of metal, then traces of such a volume should have been found throughout North America. But archaeological data does not support the widespread distribution of copper artifacts. Copper from the region appears only in limited quantities, primarily in jewelry. No weapons or industrial complexes corresponding to this quantity have been found. In the 1990s, a group of researchers proposed a hypothesis. Perhaps copper was exported beyond the continent. The theory sounds radical, but it is supported by chemical analysis. Some Bronze Age artifacts found in the eastern Mediterranean contain an isotopic signature similar to copper from the Great Lakes region. This refers to the proportion of lead isotopes characteristic of specific deposits. This could be a coincidence, or it could be the trace of a long-forgotten exchange channel that existed long before the advent of known maritime civilizations. In 2006, a report was published on possible transatlantic navigation in prehistory. According to it, seasonal currents could have allowed voyages between America and Europe using simple vessels. No state sponsored the investigation, but even without the hypothesis of contacts, the fact remains. A vast industrial operation was conducted without writing, without cities, without any discovered warehouses. The mines were organized, distributed, and, most strangely, some of them were closed manually. The masonry at the entrances is not natural. The stones were adjusted and laid with the clear intention of preserving the spoils. 1881, U.S. Geological Survey report noted that some shafts appeared to be sealed from the inside. Local residents reported discoveries of wooden tools preserved in peat bogs, dating back to before $1,000 BC. This is almost 1,500 years older than most surviving copper objects in the Americas. Why hasn't this become part of school history? Because it doesn't fit. The official chronology doesn't include industrial development on a large scale in pre-Columbian America, especially not millennia earlier. So who extracted 500,000 tons of copper? And where did it go? Maybe the local legends are right. Maybe those who mined came, did their work and left, leaving behind neither the city nor a body, only empty mines and a silence that no one is in a hurry to disturb. The missing builders of Sacsayhuaman. At an altitude of almost 3,700 meters above sea level, near the city of Cusco in Peru, lies one of the most impressive stone structures on the planet, the Fortress of Sacsayhuaman. It consists of gigantic polygonal blocks, each weighing between 50 and 300 tons. They are laid next to each other with such precision that it is impossible to insert even a blade between them. Sacsayhuaman is officially considered to have been built by the Incas. However, the Incas left no written instructions for its construction. Moreover, the Incas themselves, according to the records of Spanish chroniclers, claimed that they did not build it. It was already standing when they arrived. They merely used it as a fortress and a place of worship. Each block in the walls of Sacsayhuaman is uniquely shaped. No two are alike. They were laid without mortar, on the natural terrain, taking into account angles, curvature, and weight distribution. Modern engineers struggle to reproduce not just the masonry itself, but the design technology behind it. Even with crane technology, such assembly would require highly accurate modeling and weeks of verification for each segment. Another peculiarity is the lack of evidence of transportation. The nearest quarries are located several kilometers away. The slopes are steep. No document or legend describes the method by which these multi-ton boulders were transported. No rollers, animals, or tools were found in connection with transport logistics. There is a hypothesis that the stones were processed using local acids or heat. Some researchers claim that ancient myths mention a herb capable of softening stone. It sounds like fiction, but plants have been found in laboratory conditions that secrete organic acids that can soften the surface of limestone. An additional mystery lies in the internal passages and tunnels beneath the fortress. Many have collapsed, others are sealed. Locals speak of echo-free halls and passages leading down many levels. These claims have not been officially verified, as most underground exploration is prohibited by the protected area's status. Among the most bizarre elements is a zigzag wall that stretches for almost 400 meters. Some researchers believe this is not a defensive structure, but an energy structure designed to reflect or accumulate wave action. Tests have detected unusual electromagnetic fluctuations in certain sections of the walls. The levels are elevated but not dangerous. The source is unknown. 3 towers once stood on the summit of the plateau. Only their foundations remain. But even these foundations are composed of blocks comparable in weight to the largest monoliths in Baalbek, Asirat, Hajamal, Lebanon. How and why they were raised to such a height is not explained. The fortress's sacred function adds to the mystery. During the winter solstice, sunbeams pass between certain blocks and fall on the central altar. This creates the illusion of splitting light. This could not be accidental. The geometry is precise. Some archaeologists believe that Sacsayhuaman is not a defensive structure, but an instrument. Perhaps a calendar, perhaps an acoustic instrument, perhaps something else. But then the question arises. Who created it? If not the Incas, then who? The exact date of construction has not yet been determined. Research suggests a range from 500 to 1500 BC. However, some believe the foundation may be much older, with later cultures merely rebuilding the upper levels. Of engineering required to construct such structures exceeds anything attributed to the pre-Columbian civilizations of South America. Yet, there is not a single confirmed image of the construction process. Not a single priest architect. Not a single model. Only the result. Sacsayhuaman stands. It cannot be ignored, but it cannot be explained either. Perhaps it was not meant to be understood, only to outlive time, and those who erected it, the pyramid that bled. In 1999, during restoration work at Angkor Thom in Cambodia, a team of international specialists began clearing one of the secondary step pyramids located south of the main Bayon temple. This structure, officially designated Platform 12, had long been unexplored, considered insignificant, partially destroyed, with collapsed steps and trees growing through the foundation. But everything changed after one simple action. While cleaning one of the protruding stone blocks, the restorer accidentally hit it with a metal spatula. The stone developed a crack, a minor one, not threatening the structure, but a liquid emerged from the crack. It was dark red in color, viscous, and had a sheen reminiscent of blood. The initial reaction was an explanation. Groundwater, stained by mineral inclusions. However, when attempting to collect a sample, it turned out that the liquid did not spread across the stone. It neither absorbed nor dried. An hour after flowing, the drop remained on the surface, unchanged in texture. The sample was sent to Phnom Penh for analysis. The results were inconsistent. The composition was rich in iron, but it contained organic components not typical of normal soil fluid. Moreover, protein fragments similar to those found in biological blood but not completely identical were found in the substance's structure. It is as if it were an imitation, but not a counterfeit. Restoration work was halted. Local authorities issued a temporary ban on access to the site. The team was forced to dismantle its equipment. Officially, this was due to possible structural damage to the monument. Unofficially, it was to avoid unnecessary attention. When a group of local monks visited the site a month later, one of the elders recognized the pyramid as a place previously known from oral tradition. It was called Tapreya Pramin, which loosely translates as the Silent Bowl. Legend said that a being whose body could not be burned was imprisoned in this place, sleeping under a seal. According to the legend, if the stones wept, its breath would return. Of course, this isn't a valid argument for the academic community, but the analysis data and the authorities' refusal to continue the study have heightened interest. It later became known that at the base of the same pyramid there is an entrance to a walled-up passage. It was sealed in ancient times with stone slabs that have no decorative elements. The masonry technology differs from that of the main part of the temple. This means that the walling up took place at a different time, perhaps later. An attempt to conduct a ground-penetrating radar study revealed that the density of the material inside the base is abnormally high. The stone is not hollow. It seems to be permeated with a network of internal channels. too narrow to pass through, but too linear to be natural. They extend from the center outward, like vessels. Unofficial hypothesis suggests that the pyramid may not have been a temple, but a storage capsule. It contained an organic object placed within a structure that prevented it from decomposing. And if the structure was disturbed, it began to release its energy. Not mysticism, but substance. There's another view, that the entire structure was created as a psychoactive platform. Ancient rituals involved interacting with the stone through sound, pressure, and vibration. In some cases, such platforms responded with something, not like a mind, but like a mechanism. And the liquid wasn't blood, but an activation marker. No further publications on the Tapre Praman pyramid have appeared. The stone from which the liquid was leaking was cut away and removed, rumor has it, to a private collection. The remains of the pyramid are once again closed to tourists. A sign nearby reads, "Danger of collapse." But in the old photographs, a fixed line remains. A dark spot extends from a crack in the stone down the step. It hasn't disappeared even after 3 rainy seasons. The stone remains stained. Maybe it was just iron. Maybe biological contamination. Or maybe it was the last response from something that no longer spoke, until it was disturbed. Skeletons without a genetic past. In the early 2000s, a group of Russian and Japanese archaeologists conducted excavations in eastern Siberia, in the Yakutia region, on the edge of the permafrost. The goal was to study ancient mammoth hunting cultures. Everything was going according to plan until several well-preserved human skeletons were found in one of the sites, not far from the Indigirka River, buried in a layer more than 10,000 years old. At first glance, there was nothing unusual. The body proportions, height, and skull. Everything fit the late Paleolithic type of man. However, when comparing these remains with other finds in the region, the first discrepancy emerged: the skull shape. All 3 skeletons had a shortened skull, but with a high forehead and an almost complete absence of brow ridges. This could be an individual variation. DNA analysis has not yet been conducted. The study was conducted at an independent genetics laboratory in Novosibirsk. It was expected that the samples would show genetic affiliation with known Siberian groups, either Paleo-Asian or Native American ancestors. But the results were different. The mitochondrial DNA responsible for the maternal line did not match any known databases. Not Asian, not American, not even European. The match level was less than 1%. The same thing happened with the Y chromosome. The genome was not empty, but it turned out to be so isolated that it could not be assigned to any ethnic or regional group. A hypothesis has been put forward. Perhaps this was a group that existed autonomously and died out without leaving a trace. However, this is not supported by archaeological evidence. No traces of a settlement, tools, or cultural layers have been found nearby. The skeletons were in an isolated layer, but not buried. They were simply lying there as if they had been abandoned. Additionally, an object was found near the bodies. A worked plate-shaped stone with dots etched into it in a spiral pattern. It did not resemble either a weapon or jewelry. Upon comparison, it turned out that the same spiral is found in rock paintings in Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and even Alaska. Moreover, in layers from different eras. The same symbol, scattered across thousands of kilometers, with no connection between cultures. Archaeologists have put forward a more cautious theory. Perhaps they were a group of migrants from the south whose genetics were lost during interbreeding. However, analysis showed that the DNA structure of the skeletons was too coherent, with no signs of mutations from interbreeding. This suggests the group was closed, but not isolated from others, as if it had no connection to other populations to begin with. Another peculiarity is the condition of the teeth. All 3 individuals were free of caries. The enamel was almost completely intact. This is unusual for an era when food was coarse and unprocessed. Moreover, the structure of the skeletons shows a very low level of stress on the bones, as if these people did not engage in heavy physical labor. Instead of clarifying the origin, each analysis only widened the gap. After the publication of the initial findings, further research was discontinued. The archaeological report was published in limited circulation. The samples were not added to international databases. One of the project's co-authors, who advocated reopening the site, left the research team. His subsequent activities are not related to archaeology. Why haven't these skeletons become the subject of active discussion? Because they can't be explained. because science doesn't work with things that don't fit into theory, because it's much easier to say error, contamination, glitch. But if this is not a failure, if it was another branch that came, left 3 and went back to where no one else came from, what did we find then? The Giant's Hammer in South Africa. In 1984, near the town of Swabruken in South Africa, miners in one of the stone quarries came across an object that they initially mistook for a strange piece of rock. It was partially embedded in the rock, but had a straight handle and a rounded, slightly flattened end. After being removed from the rock, it became clear. This was an object indistinguishable in shape and proportions from a hammer. The handle was composed of stone and layered mineral. The head was made of a material containing a large amount of iron. It was 2.5 times larger than a typical hammer and weighed about 9 kilograms. The strangest thing is the place where it was found. The age of the surrounding rock, according to the geological layer, was over 100 million years. This doesn't mean the object was created during that era, but it was firmly embedded in the rock mass, without disrupting the layers. Questions arose. Did it get there later? Is it possible that a crack in the rock allowed the object to enter? Paleogeologists conducted an analysis. It was discovered that the rock surrounding the object was solidified, with no signs of fracture. This rules out a late impact. The hammerhead material was found to be nearly 97% pure iron, but with an unusual crystalline structure. There was no rust inside. The metal was stabilized by natural or unknown means. When attempting to determine its melting temperature, researchers encountered a surprise. The structure did not correspond to known forging or casting methods. The only published report was made by an independent geologist in 1985. After that, the item passed into the hands of a private owner, who displays it as an exhibit in a private collection. Official archaeologists refused to recognize the find as an artifact. The explanation was a geological coincidence, the shape a coincidence, and the age irrelevant to the object. However, to this day, no one has been able to recreate an accurate model of petrification that could explain how the rock formed around the object without visible traces of intervention. Some alternative researchers call the object the Giant's Hammer. They believe it is proof of the existence of a prehistoric technological civilization, lost long before the advent of known humanity. This version has a weak point. There are no additional finds confirming industrial activity in the area at that time. But there are details that make it difficult to refute. For example, there are traces of hand finishing at the junction of the handle and head. The stone is cut at an angle not found in natural erosion. The metal head is framed as if by a hand-inserted clamp. Under a microscope, signs of grinding are visible. Is all this a coincidence? Perhaps. The official position of academic archaeology is that the object has not been sufficiently verified. To recognize an artifact, controlled excavations, verified dating, and repeatability are required. All true. But the question remains, if all this is a geological coincidence, then why does every element point to engineering work? The history of such finds is short. Usually they disappear, fall into private hands, or become exhibition rarities. They are forgotten. They don't fit in. They get in the way. Perhaps this object really is just a stone, accidentally fused with iron. Or perhaps it is the imprint of someone's hand, which we do not recognize because it does not fit into the textbook. A cave that breathes light. In southwestern Iran, in Khuzestan province, in the Zardku Mountains, there is a cave that locals simply call Nadir. Translated, it means lowest point or depression. It was first mentioned in the 1970s, when geologists arrived in the region to map karst systems. At the time, the cave was described as a shallow sinkhole with no signs of archaeological remains. The situation changed in 2009 when speleologists from Tehran, conducting a resurvey of the area, decided to delve deeper into the site. Inside, they discovered 2 main chambers. One was narrow, with rock falls. The second one is wide and almost spherical, with perfectly smooth walls. The ceiling is about 12 meters high. Naturally, there was no lighting inside. It was here that what later became known as the breathing light began. While camping overnight in the main chamber, one of the participants noticed a faint, almost indistinguishable glow. It emanated from the northern wall, closer to the floor. At first, it was mistaken for phosphorescence or a reflection of equipment, but when all light sources were turned off, the effect remained. No direction, just a dim glow, like a light fog with a pale tint. The next morning, the light disappeared. On a return visit a month later, it happened again. Always at night, always in the same place. Scientists decided to conduct baseline measurements. The air temperature near the wall was 1.2 degrees higher than in the rest of the cave. Radiation levels were within normal limits. Chemical analysis of the air revealed nothing unusual. The wall was dry. The stone was limestone, like in other parts of the hall. But when I tried to photograph the glow zone, the results were inconsistent. In some shots, there was nothing. In others, there was a faint greenish spot, but only with a long exposure. Mineral experts were invited. They hypothesized the presence of microscopic crystals capable of accumulating light. However, direct examination of the wall material did not confirm this. There was no luminescence or crystalline inclusions. The surface was clean, smooth, and neutral. Repeated measurements over the course of a year showed that the effect occurs only between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, only during certain phases of the moon, and only in the complete absence of extraneous light. It cannot be induced, only recorded. Locals refuse to approach the cave after sunset. They say the place was closed to the voice, that once a year the sky breathes something from it. No details, no rituals, only prohibition and respect. Not a single report on the cave has been published in scientific journals. Only the speleological group's archives contain classified data. In 2017, the site's coordinates were removed from public geological maps. The motivation was environmental protection, but the phenomenon exists. It's documented, described, recorded. No traces of life, ancient presence, or artifacts have been found in the cave. Only emptiness, a smooth wall, and something that occasionally emits light without being light. This is not proof. This is not a myth. It is simply a fact for which there is no explanation yet. Perhaps the stone remembers energy. Perhaps it reflects not what we see, but what once was. Or maybe the wall breathes, not with air, but with what was once given to it, and it returns it. At night, when no one asks. A 3,000-year-old telescope. In the mid-19th century, British archaeologists led by Austin Henry Layard conducted excavations in the area of the ancient city of Nimrud, one of the centers of Assyrian civilization. Among the many artifacts found, tablets, weapons, jewelry, the researchers' attention was drawn to a small, at first glance, inconspicuous object made of polished quartz. It's about 3.5 centimeters long. One side is flat, the other concave. The surface is perfectly polished. The corners are not sharp, but rather polished, like those of objects held in the hand. It was classified as a ritual crystal. It was later removed to storage at the British Museum, where it remained until the early 20th century. In the 1920s, Italian optics engineer Giovanni Pettini saw a mention of the object in an archival catalog. On his initiative, the object was recovered and studied. It turned out to have lens-like properties. At the correct refraction angle, it magnifies the image by approximately 1.5 times. Moreover, there is virtually no distortion at the periphery. Pettini suggested that it might have been a prototype lens used as a viewing instrument, perhaps not for the eyes, but for focusing light. However, this idea was not accepted by the academic community. The lens did not fit into the understanding of Mesopotamian technology. However, in 2001, optical physicist Peter Lloyd re-examined the lens and concluded that its shape corresponded to a bioconvex element capable of producing a close-up image on a flat surface. This means that it could have been used for carving, studying details, or even astronomical observations. What's particularly interesting is that a carved ivory fragment was found next to this object, depicting a deity with a long pipe pointing toward the sky. Previously, this was thought to be a musical instrument. You can see that the front of the tube expands like a lens. The figure's hand isn't playing, it's holding. There is other evidence. Some Babylonian tablets depict celestial bodies invisible to the naked eye. Among them is Saturn's moon Titan. It could not be observed without magnification. Where does this information come from then? Proponents of the ancient optics hypothesis argue that Nimrud may have had applied optical technology that was later lost, not in widespread use, not for everyone, only for priests or royal astronomers. However, not a single body in a frame or mount from the telescope has been found. There are no drawings or records, only a quartz lens and images that can be interpreted in various ways. Skeptics believe that the lens was an element of decoration, or an amulet, perhaps a random shape, perhaps a natural lens, simply polished. But there's a catch. Natural lenses don't produce a clear image. They refract with severe distortion. This object, however, works. In 2013, one of the researchers conducted an experiment. He made a replica of the lens and inserted it into a wooden tube with a rudimentary focusing device. Under clear sky conditions, he was able to discern the phases of Venus and details of the lunar surface. Not in detail, but clearly. This does not prove that the ancient Assyrians observed the sky with telescopes, but it shows that they could. The question is, why did they need it? Their astronomy was precise. Their calendar was strict. The sun, the moon, Venus, everything was documented. Perhaps knowledge came not only from observation, but from instruments. The city that disappeared in the Andes. In early 1976, a group of Argentine geographers conducting field measurements in the western Andes discovered an area on a satellite image that showed a regular urban footprint. Straight lines, symmetrical structures, and ordered rows are features that are rarely random in mountainous conditions. The area was not listed on topographic maps. No settlements were recorded at these coordinates. The expedition was organized 2 months later. A team of 6 people climbed to the designated sector. The altitude was about 3,500 meters. The weather was stable. Access was difficult, but possible. At the site, they found stone platforms, rectangular, laid out of roughly hewn blocks, without masonry. There were more than 24 of them. They were located along barely visible streets. All the foundations were empty. No walls, no roofs, no remains of wood, only traces of a foundation. Not a single personal item nearby. No ceramics, no metal, no bones. A complete absence of household waste. This is not an abandoned village. It is an empty structure, devoid of content. In the center is a rectangular area. On it is a flat stone with a depression. There are no traces of a fire or sacrifices. The soil around the stone is heavily compacted, as if it had been walked on repeatedly. But the purpose is unclear. The strangest thing is the doorways carved into the rock near the complex. Several arches leading to nowhere. No chambers behind them, no tunnels. Only smooth vertical openings, as if deliberately left symbolically. Geologists have noted that the rock is not easily worked. It is volcanic tuff, requiring tools. Not a single tool was found within a kilometer radius. A hypothesis arose. Perhaps this is a ritual city, not intended for habitation, but only for ceremonies. But one detail speaks against this. The canal system. Along the streets there were depressions designed to drain water. Such a structure makes no sense in a place where no one lives. An attempt was made to determine whether the site was recorded in local myths. In 1980, one of the expedition members reported a conversation with an elderly shepherd from a nearby valley settlement. He said that when he was young, he saw a stone city inhabited by mutes, people who didn't speak, but understood everything. They came, built, and left. Not a sound, not a trace. They simply disappeared. Another expedition arrived at this site in 1981, and here begins the paradox. The shape of the buildings had changed. Those who returned a second time said that some platforms were shorter and one of the doors was filled in. There is no evidence that anyone altered the landscape. There are no signs of tampering. Only photographs. And they really do show differences. Objects that weren't there, and the absence of those that were. This gave rise to a theory. Perhaps what we see before us is not a static structure, not a city, but a model, a projection, an object that can be changed. Not by architecture, but by space itself. Among alternative researchers, the opinion has emerged that the city did not disappear. It did not fully manifest itself, something like a memory of the place, or a residual pattern. But then another question arises. If this is not a residential place, but something that is formed temporarily, then according to what principle does it appear? And for whom? Today, this area is officially designated as an archaeological zone with no permanent monuments. There are no signs, no work, there are no tours. It's simply marked as a geologically interesting site. No people, no signs of the past. Just a trace, just a shape. And in this trace is all that remains, or all that can return. Carvings depicting an impossible sky. The Myingyan Plateau in central Myanmar is home to numerous ancient temples, most of which date back to the 13th to 15th centuries. Among them are dozens of little-known structures that have not yet been fully catalogued. In 2012, one of these temples, hidden behind the ruins of the main complex, was discovered to have wall carvings whose contents challenged several established ideas about astronomy and dating. The carving was located in a poorly lit chamber, behind a blocked passage. The wall was covered in soot, and the design was almost invisible without directed light. After cleaning, an image was revealed. A circular sky with fixed stars, lines, and several unusual objects. At first glance, it looks like a typical cosmogram. But upon closer analysis, researchers noticed a discrepancy. The star positions in the drawing did not correspond to the modern sky. Neither Sirius, nor Polaris, nor the Milky Way were in their proper places. It was assumed that the artist had made a mistake. However, one of the astronomers who advised on the project attempted to shift the celestial sphere in time using computer reconstruction. The result turned out to be accurate. The sky depicted corresponds to the configuration of the star field around 10,500 BC. This era is known as the end of the last ice age. The arrangement of celestial bodies then differs from the present one due to the precession of the Earth's axis. It is impossible to find such a coincidence by chance. It requires accurate observation or access to knowledge based on modeling of long-term celestial cycles. No known civilization of that time possessed either technology, writing, or the need for such knowledge. This is long before the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and even the earliest megalithic structures in Europe. But the painting on the wall does exist. Additional evidence was provided by the fact that two symbols identical to those used in later Tibetan astrological diagrams were carved next to the image. This could mean that the image was redrawn or stored from memory. But where could this memory come from? On the adjacent wall was a second drawing. It depicted a man standing under the stars, holding a semicircular object resembling a sextant or observation disc. There was no signature or date, just a figure and lines leading the eye upward. It has been hypothesized that the carving may have been borrowed from another culture. However, such a star-shaped image has not been found in China, India, or Tibet. It is unique to the region. More strange that it was chosen to be applied to the wall of a closed hall, in which, apparently, no rituals were performed. Chemical analysis of the soot showed that the layer of carbon had been forming for centuries. This means the carving existed long before the chamber was revisited. It is not a modern forgery. It is old. The question is how old? Further complicating matters is the lack of other elements that indicate the temple was used as an observatory. There are no optical cutouts, linear orientations, or upward access to the sky. Just this single carving, hidden from view. Proponents of the lost civilizations hypothesis believe the drawing is evidence of information transmission through an unknown chain, that someone once recorded the sky and transmitted it in a form that was later adopted, through images, through memory, through a temple. Skeptic's object. Coincidence. Error. Artistic license. But none of them can explain why not just the shape, but the specific position of the stars matches, with an accuracy of 1 degree. A book that no one will touch. The archives of the Museum of Asian Traditions in Prague contain an artifact rarely mentioned in open sources. It is an ancient manuscript of unknown origin, presumably dating to the 13th or 14th century. The pages are made of the finest leather. The cover is a dense embossed material similar to varnished parchment. The book has no title. On the spine is only a single symbol, resembling an open circle. There are no documents confirming the manuscript's arrival in the collection. It is believed to have been brought from Tibet in the 1940s. It was initially attributed to the Buddhist tradition, but the language of the text does not match any known dialect, neither Sanskrit nor Tibetan nor Mongolian. The structure of the symbols resembles cursive, but the rhythm and repetition are undecipherable. Translation attempts were made at least 7 times, each with different results. One researcher saw philosophical paradoxes in the text, a second, an encrypted medical treatise, a third, a map of astronomical cycles. There was no agreement between their interpretations. The manuscript is currently in storage. It's not on display. It's not available upon request, not because it's damaged or poses a threat, but because a number of coincidences have accumulated around it, which the museum prefers not to discuss officially. The first researcher to begin deciphering the code was hospitalized a week later with signs of acute mental illness. He claimed to have seen words moving within the paper. The second abandoned the work, claiming to have begun seeing identical phrases in his dreams. The third one ceased all activity and disappeared from the academic field. His contact information is unavailable. The others completed their research without finding anything concrete. But everyone spoke of a feeling of pressure, not from the text, but from the subject itself. The manuscript is thin, only about 40 pages. Almost all of them contain symbols arranged in a spiral. In some cases, the text runs from the center of the page outward. In others, it runs from the edge inward. At the bottom of some pages are geometric diagrams, but they are not mandalas. Not a single element matches Tibetan ritual images. One of the pages depicts the silhouette of a man standing in an arch. He has no face. Above his head is a figure resembling an eye, open at the bottom. This image appears only once. On the other pages are abstract forms. There is no system. In 2011, a group of cryptographers attempted to analyze the structure. The distribution of symbols turned out to be non-random. It corresponded to the logic of machine code, where each symbol occupies a strictly assigned space. However, it was not possible to determine which alphabet the code belonged to. After this, the manuscript was sealed in a protective container. The museum explained this was due to the need for climate control. In reality, not a single employee signed on to continue working with the artifact. Unofficially, it is referred to as the book that no one touches. Some believe the book is simply a clever forgery, an object created for mystification. Others believe it is not a text, but an activation structure, not intended to be read, and for launching, internal or external. And that the strange behavior is not related to the symbols, but to the composition as a whole. Over the decades, there have been few attempts, because everyone who started quickly stopped, either due to the state, or due to feelings, or without explanation. It's stored in a separate compartment in the storage facility. There are no special signs, just a label, closed, no reason given. The official position is that the subject hasn't been sufficiently studied. It's of no cultural interest, it poses no threat, but access to it isn't granted, not even to employees. And this is strange, because the museum shows artifacts that are older and more fragile, but not this one. Maybe it's just a book, too complicated, or fake, or maybe it just wasn't meant for us. Not in the sense that we won't understand, but in the sense that we're not the reader. A temple built upside down. In the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu, near the city of Tiruvannamalai, lies a small stone temple that is rarely mentioned in guidebooks. It is not listed as a prominent architectural monument in the region and has no official name. Locals simply call it Shirapalam, inverted base. At first glance, it looks like a typical Dravidian-style structure. One central hall, massive columns, a dome. But upon closer inspection, it becomes clear. The temple was built inverted. Not visually, but structurally. The floor has a domed rise, the ceiling is perfectly level. The architectural elements typical of the base are located above. Niches, which are usually used for drainage or artifacts, are located in the vault. The shape of the columns tapers downwards, not upwards. The bases of the capitals resemble crowns. The entire building seems to rest not on a foundation, but on its own summit. Architects who visited the temple concluded that such an inversion was impossible without deliberate design. That is, the building did not fall or tip over. It was designed that way. Moreover, the weight calculations and load distribution were flawless. The structure is stable, does not deform, and does not require supports. This is not an engineering error. It is the intention. No other temple in India has such a symmetrical inversion been found. There are localized geometric irregularities and temporary structures, but not complete mirroring in the vertical axis. There are no inscriptions on the walls of the building. There is no iconography. There is no scene indicating cult affiliation. Only one element stands out from the symmetry. On the central wall is a symbol resembling an open palm with a hexagonal pattern inside. It does not belong to either Hindu or Jain symbols. In 1987, a researcher from Bangalore University attempted to make a comparison with early astronomical observatories. He noticed that the temple's orientation did not correspond to the cardinal directions. Instead, the temple's axis is aligned with the point where Sirius rises on the winter solstice. This suggests that the building may have served not a cultic, but an astronomical or symbolic function. But even if so, the main question remains: why build a structure upside down? Some believe it was a form of meditation, that inside this temple, a person would feel outside of normal logic, deprived of the usual up and down. This state was used in some early practices of yoga and Shaktism, where loss of orientation was necessary to enter an altered state. Others believe it's an allegory. The temple is built to resemble a person's structure in a dream. All the symbols are displaced, all the dots are inverted, and only in this way can one achieve the perception of the inner temple. But even these versions do not explain the technical execution, the weight of the stone, the angle of the walls, the geometry of the foundation. Everyone points out that the building was designed from scratch in this form, as if the architecture was built from the ceiling down, as if the top was built first, and then what it will stand on. This design logic does not correspond to traditional Indian canonical architecture. No rules of Vastu Shastra allow such a sequence. This is not simply a violation of norms. It is the creation of a new system. Today, the temple is closed to regular visitors. Its exterior is partially collapsed, but the internal structure remains intact. Several research groups have attempted to recreate a model of the building, but when the plan is transferred to a standard upright orientation, all proportions are lost. The building becomes unstable. Paradox? The temple can only exist upside down. Only then does it support its weight. Only then does it remain intact. If it's a bug, it's impossible. If it's an experiment, it's successful. If it's code, we haven't figured out how to read it. Stones that hum when touched. In southwest Wales, in the Preseli Hills area, there's a plateau of scree stones, known in the archaeological literature as one of the possible origins of the Stonehenge bluestones. A unique volcanic stone, dolerite, has long been mined here, distinguished by its strength and sonic properties. It is the sonic properties of these stones that give rise to the phenomena now known as singing boulders. In 1996, a team of British researchers conducting geoacoustic measurements as part of an archaeosound modeling project recorded that when some of the plateau's boulders were struck, a distinct rumble was heard. The sound is not simply reflected, it is amplified, persists for several seconds, and is accompanied by a weak vibration that can be felt even by the palm of the hand. Further investigation revealed that this is not an echo. The stone itself produces a sound close in frequency to 95-105 Hz. It corresponds to the register of the human voice and some percussion instruments. The effect occurs only with certain blocks and only with precisely directed impact force. It was later discovered that some stones produce sound even when touched. No impact, just pressure. A quiet, almost infrasonic response. Not all stones, only those whose shape is close to an elongated cylinder or a truncated cone. These are called tuned. Physicists explain this simply. Internal stress and the specific structure of the rock's crystal lattice create a piezoacoustic resonance effect. In theory, yes. In practice, there's no explanation why only some stones exhibit this property. The rest are neutral. In 2008, a team from Cardiff University discovered that some of the stones on the plateau were positioned vertically, not naturally. The base was leveled, and the orientation was chosen. It seemed as if the stones had not fallen, but were placed there. And these were the ones making the sound. This sparked a wave of hypotheses. Perhaps the ancient inhabitants of these areas used the acoustic properties of stones in rituals. Perhaps the stones were arranged according to the principle of frequency resonance, a kind of open instrument activated by voice or drum sound. For a long time, archaeologists rejected these theories. But in 2014, during excavations in Preseli, a carved bowl was found in one of the stones. It was shallow, with a smooth rim and a thin stripe inside. When you strike the bowl, it creates a standing wave that can be heard from several meters away. A persistent feeling arises. This is not a natural form. It is an instrument. Question: if stones really do make sound when touched, why, and who knew how to choose them? The technology for creating musical stone requires precise knowledge of the rock's properties and geometry. In modern practice, such elements are manufactured in specialized factories, but they were already there in Preseli. No signs of processing, only alignment and orientation. One explanation is coincidence. Perhaps ancient people chose the sounding stones by chance. But then why are they placed vertically? Why are there signs on them? Why does their arrangement repeat in a certain rhythm? Some researchers suggest that stones were used to create a sound environment that alters consciousness. Low frequencies, rhythmic vibrations, and a sense of volume all influence the perception of space and time. In caves in France and Spain, areas have also been found where images of animals coincide with acoustic zones. Perhaps the sound was not entertainment, but a mechanism, an element of a ritual, or even a means of communication. Today, stones do not sound like musical instruments. Their sounds are muffled, uneven, barely perceptible, but they are there, recorded by instruments, confirmed by independent groups. This is not a miracle. This is physics, but physics that someone knew and used. Maybe not for music, but for tuning, space, a person, or someone who was supposed to hear not a word, but a tone. Yonaguni underwater ruins. Off the southwest coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, in 1986, diver and diving instructor Kihachiro Arata discovered a structure on the ocean floor that has since sparked controversy among archaeologists, geologists, and ancient history enthusiasts. At a depth of about 25 meters underwater, there's an object resembling a stepped platform, almost 150 meters long and 20 meters high. It consists of smooth horizontal and vertical lines, angles, terraces, and rectangular recesses. At first glance, it resembles a sunken pyramid or megastructure. The first explanation is a natural origin. Geologists claim that the rock in this area is sandstone, prone to fracture. Under the influence of tectonic forces, it can crack along straight lines, forming stepped shapes. However, a problem arises when studying the symmetry of the object. Some terraces run at right angles. Between them are narrow passages reminiscent of flights of stairs. There are vertical shafts, precisely matching in depth and width. One of these flights leads to a room with two parallel walls. All of this looks formed, not random. In 1997, Professor Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus stated that the shape of the structure, the arrangement of its elements, and the overall layout were consistent with an artificial structure that was submerged in water approximately 10,000 years ago. He suggested that it might have been an ancient temple or city that sank due to rising sea levels after the last ice age. Kimura conducted dozens of dives, documenting more than 20 structural features, including potential animal carvings, traces of carved staircases, circular pools, and even linear grooves running along the perimeter of the main platform. He published photographs and proposed a reconstruction of the possible building. Many scholars have criticized his work. The main argument is the lack of context. There are no artifacts, no organic material for dating, no writing, not a single potsherd bone or human trace. The structure is in stone. The stone is ancient. But this does not mean that the object is built. However, three aspects support an artificial origin. First, the platform is oriented north with a deviation of no more than 3 degrees. Secondly, the horizontal lines on it are repeated at regular intervals. Thirdly, there are similar projections nearby, but on a smaller scale, as if it were a single architectural ensemble. Furthermore, stones with unknown symbols resembling pictograms were found near Yonaguni. They are heavily weathered and undecipherable, but the very fact of their presence nearby reinforces the question. If the structure is indeed built, then it is at least 8 to 12,000 years old. This undermines the entire picture of the emergence of civilization in the region. At that time, according to the archaeological model, people were hunter-gatherers. They did not build platforms, carve stairs, or carve rectangular chambers into sea cliffs. Proponents of the ancient maritime civilization hypothesis argue that Yonaguni is just the tip of the iceberg, that beneath the water, along the contours of present-day Japan, lie traces of submerged settlements built before the catastrophe. Perhaps sudden, perhaps global. Skeptics answer simply, it's a natural phenomenon. Rocks can crack perfectly. Wind, waves, seismic activity. But no one explains why everything came together so neatly here. Yonaguni has no official archaeological classification. It remains unlisted as a monument. No museum holds exhibitions on the subject. Kimura's materials are not used in textbooks. Research continues solely thanks to enthusiasts and divers. But every year new people descend there, and each time they see something that doesn't look random, not fantastic, simply too right. Maybe it's an illusion of form, or maybe it's an imprint of something they weren't supposed to see. But they found it, underwater, at the bottom of memory. Village without shadows. In the highlands of Peru, in the Huánuco region, there is a village called Casapata. The place is inaccessible. The road to it runs through rocky passes and is not marked on tourist routes. The settlement is small, with about 30 houses built of local stone. Externally, it looks no different from other Andean villages. However, anyone who has been there on the summer solstice has noticed one strange feature. At midday, the houses cast no shadows. The effect seems impossible. The sun is high, its light falling from an angle, and yet there are no clear shadows from roofs, walls, or beams on the ground. Only soft, diffused lighting, as if the light isn't falling, but filling the space. Physically, this is only possible with a perfect alignment of the terrain's slope, the orientation of the buildings, and the astronomical position of the sun. However, in Casapat, the shadows do not appear on any one specific building, but rather throughout the entire perimeter of the village. This creates the impression that the architecture was designed specifically for this phenomenon. In 2015, a group of students from the University of Lima conducted measurements using laser levels, light-sensitive sensors, and angle meters. It was discovered that all the houses in the village were oriented according to a uniform pattern. The deviation is within 2 degrees. The roofs are sloped at an angle that coincides with the summer zenith at this latitude. Even the stone projections, beams, and overhangs are aligned so as not to block the direct flow of light. Yet not a single villager knows why everything is arranged this way. There are no records. There is no tradition explaining the orientation. Most of the houses have been restored, but their foundations remain the same. The stone on the foundation is old, darkened, clearly not modern. Another phenomenon is associated with the main square. On the day of the solstice, the sun passes directly through a narrow gap between 2 boulders standing on a hill behind the village. A beam of light hits the exact center of a circle of gravel. This circle is almost invisible on other days, but at this moment, it is completely and evenly illuminated. Such precision is impossible without preliminary observations, and most importantly, without intention. Even in Machu Picchu, the effect of solstice orientation is limited. Here, however, the entire village functions as a solar resonator. Some researchers suggest that the site may have been part of a larger astronomical network that used natural landforms and solar positions to create a ritual or observation center. It's possible that Caçapata is the remnant of an older settlement, whose functions have long been forgotten. This is supported by the strange shape of some of the windows. They are not rectangular, but trapezoidal, tapering upward. When light hits the room at a certain time of day, the rays create a closed figure inside. This could be a coincidence, or it could be a way to calibrate time. There are no written sources in the village. There are no mentions in the Inca chronicles, but local legends say that Caçapata was a place where there were no shadows, so as not to hide the truth. This phrase is passed down without comment. It is not explained. It is simply repeated. Modern attempts at analysis run into the same thing. The architecture is too precise. The source is unknown. There are no answers, only the facts. Every summer, solstice, the sun rises over the valley, the light falls, and there is no shadow. This is not a myth. This is not a religion. This is engineering, carried out by someone who understood how not only stone, but also light works. Why is unknown, but what we see cannot be a coincidence. Tooth with a map. In 2002, in the Olduvai Gorge region of northern Tanzania, a group of paleoanthropologists discovered a human skeleton dated to approximately 12,000 years BC. The skeleton belonged to an adult male, approximately 40 years old at the time of death. The main attention was initially drawn to his condition, an almost complete skeleton, well-preserved joints, and no injuries. But the real mystery was uncovered later, when researchers conducted a microscopic examination of one of the molars. On its surface, in the area not used for chewing, were microscopic notches that, when magnified, resembled a relief map. At first glance, it seems like a random pattern, but under the microscope, it turns out the lines have structure. They are not chaotic. They bend, turn at angles, and converge at nodes. The researchers compared the lines with topographic maps of the region. It turned out that the shape of several lines matches the outlines of Lake Natron and nearby mountain ranges. Coincidence? Possibly. But then the question arises, how did such a pattern appear on the surface of the tooth? A study of the depth of the cuts showed that they are not the result of natural erosion or chewing. The depth is uniform, the contours are clear, and the edges are not blurred. This excludes the mechanical impact of food. Furthermore, the lines are positioned to avoid areas prone to abrasion. They are applied in a protected area, where they are more difficult to destroy. The random shape hypothesis proved weak. Researchers compared teeth with other teeth found in the same region. None of them had even a remotely similar structure. Not in shape, not in number, not in depth. It has been suggested that this was a ritual application. Perhaps ancient man deliberately scratched symbols into the tooth with a fine instrument. But if so, why? A person could not see this surface. It was located deep in the oral cavity. No instrument of that time allowed working with such precision without damaging the enamel. The second hypothesis is that it was a natural defect, the result of a mutation. However, the lines are too regular. They do not intersect randomly. Their direction is consistent. This rules out an anatomical defect. On one of the tooth lines, there is a dotted sequence of 7 depressions, located strictly at intervals of 0.5 millimeters. This could have been a decorative element, or a counting system. Nearby is a curved arc, which, according to geographers, coincides with the shape of the coastline of the Kagera region. Another fact, on the inner side of the tooth in a barely visible area, there is a small ring inscribed in another arc. It is barely noticeable without magnification. Its diameter is less than 1 millimeter. It is not associated with damage. It is a form, complete and aligned. No artifact from that time has the same structure. Not on bone, not on stone, only this tooth. After the publication of the preliminary report, work was suspended due to the lack of comparable materials. The tooth is stored in a closed archive at the Paleoanthropological Center in Dar es Salaam and is not publicly accessible. Officially, the notches are considered meaningless, but no researcher has been able to explain how they arose, why they haven't been destroyed, or why they resemble a micromap. Some suggest that this was a way of encoding memory, not for reading, but for transfer. That knowledge was not written, but implanted, not into text, but into the body. This is a hypothesis without evidence. But the very fact of a tooth imprinted with topography remains. It is not a myth, not an illusion. Simply something that cannot be explained within the limits of accessible history. Cave paintings that move. In the Khenti mountain range in northern Mongolia, there is a little-known cave, designated in scientific archives as Site TK-47. It was discovered in 1973 by an expedition from the Academy of Sciences, but remained unexplored for several decades due to its remoteness and weather conditions. In 2011, a group of speleologists and archaeologists revisited the cave to create a digital map. It was then that they recorded what was later called dynamic contour fixation. On the walls of the cave, in the main hall, there are drawings made with red and black ochre. The images are traditional for Paleolithic art: animals, anthropomorphic figures, hunting scenes. However, one element attracted the attention of the researchers. On the north wall is a large image of a horse in full leap. The detail is clearly depicted: the muscles, the pose, even the direction of the gaze. However, on subsequent visits, slight differences in the position of the outlines were noted. In photographs taken 1 year apart, the neckline is misaligned. In one image, it is elongated. In the other, it is bent. The difference is less than 2 centimeters, but it is recorded both visually and by digital superposition. We tested the hypothesis of paint peeling, plaque, and moisture. No external changes were detected. The pigment is stable, the walls are not subject to condensation, and the structure is intact. However, repeat measurements in 2015, 2017, and 2020 again showed that the outline is changing. It doesn't disappear. In fact, it shifts, as if the pattern is not static. The phenomenon is observed in only 2 images in the cave. The others remain unchanged. Both are in an area shielded from direct sunlight. Illumination is provided only by flashlights or lamps. This eliminates exposure to ultraviolet radiation, solar heat, and seasonal factors. Laser scanning was performed. The outline of the drawing has no ridges or depressions. The paint is applied to a flat surface. However, this creates the illusion of volume, as if the image changes depending on the viewing angle. An optical phenomenon? Possibly. However, cameras also record different positions of the lines. This means that the effect is not only subjective, it is reproducible. When shooting repeatedly from the same point, the image on the video and the photograph differs. Not always. Only during certain periods of the year. This was the key. It turned out that changes are recorded only on the days of the equinoxes and solstices. Then the contour becomes slightly different. It doesn't disappear, but it seems to change phase. No single explanation provides a comprehensive answer. Physically, the drawing does not move. Chemically, the pigment is inactive. Mechanically, the surface is not subject to deformation, but the image behaves as a variable structure. Locals say these walls breathe with the earth, and that the drawings were made not for aesthetics, but to leave signs for the future, without further elaboration. Alternative theories have suggested that the images may be encoded through a frequency rhythm activated by time. It's not movement, it's a change in perception. In Paleolithic cultures, images served not only as symbols but also as focal points. If the outline changes, this can be an element of influence. Official science is still refraining from making assessments. There are reports, photos have been published, but no conclusions have been drawn. The drawings have been recorded as unstable, and work in the cave continues. Perhaps it's a quirk of the lighting, or the pigment. Perhaps it's a visual error, or nature's. But for now, every return to TK-47 shows one thing: The drawings are not dead. They don't disappear. They are being adjusted, as if someone is still editing the memory. Slowly, not loudly, according to their own calendar. A room that rejects technology. In 2009, a team of Egyptian archaeologists was conducting restoration work at a little-known temple complex in the Bahariya oasis in western Egypt. The complex was partially destroyed, with most of the rooms buried under sand. Inside one of the side corridors, behind a solid stone slab, the workers stumbled upon the entrance to a previously unknown chamber. It was small, approximately 4 by 6 meters, with smooth walls and a high ceiling. There was no decoration, no images, only a single niche in the wall. It was later designated simply Chamber D7. Technical problems began immediately after entering. The portable floodlight was the first to fail. The bulb didn't burn out. It simply stopped working. Then 2 radios failed, one completely, the other with static interference. Within an hour, the digital camera and portable moisture detector failed. At first, this was considered a coincidence, but after a second visit with different equipment, the situation repeated itself. Digital devices do not work within the D7 camera. Cameras don't turn on, and audio recording is impossible. Battery-powered flashlights continue to shine, but mobile phones turn off a few seconds after entering. An electromagnetic field test was performed. The results are normal, radiation levels are standard for the region, temperature is stable, humidity is low, there is no field distortion, no radio interference, everything except the fact the equipment refuses to function inside. The third expedition decided to take measurements using analog equipment, film cameras, compasses, and pencil notes. The compasses showed slight fluctuations, but within acceptable limits. The film was overexposed in some areas, but other frames showed clear images. The effect was inconsistent. Workers and guards were interviewed simultaneously. Several complained of headaches and disorientation after a few minutes in the chamber. One described a feeling of pressure in their ears. Another reported a sound similar to a low hum, although the instruments did not detect the noise. The chamber's unique acoustics are key. When sounds are produced at a certain frequency, a standing wave is created, creating a sound compression effect. This can cause a physiological response, mild disorientation, nausea, and altered spatial perception. But this doesn't explain the digital device shutdown. Attempts were made to shield the equipment, wrapping it in foil, using protective containers, and shorting out batteries. The result remained the same. The equipment didn't work. Outside the chamber, it turned on immediately. No overheating, no damage. It was later discovered that the niche in the wall itself is hemispherical, oriented precisely to the south. Inside it, a polished section of stone, slightly concave, was discovered. Under the microscope, the surface is smooth and glassy. There are no signs of processing, no dust, no layers. It's as if someone polished it to a mirror finish but left it unfinished. The chamber is made of limestone. There are no unusual inclusions. However, when the wall is struck, an acoustic response is generated that can be heard in other parts of the complex. It's as if the chamber is acting as a resonator. Proponents of unconventional theories believe the room was a place for tuning perception, not for living, not for storage, but for short-term stays, perhaps in silence, perhaps in a special sound. And this is precisely what creates the interference. Official science has not commented. The technical report states, lack of conditions for high-quality photographic recording. After this, the chamber was closed due to the risk of damage. The object is considered unstable. No further research was conducted. Today, the D7 camera remains locked. Not a single photo, not a single precise diagram, only archival recordings and a description, and a list of devices that stopped working as soon as they were inside. This is not proof of anything, just a fact. Sometimes the technologies we create refuse to enter a foreign environment. Maybe because the environment is hostile, or maybe because it is simply not designed for interaction. A grave that screams without a sound. As at the northern tip of Sumatra Island in the Aceh region, archaeologists recorded an anomalous burial discovered during preparation for road construction. The site was a stone tomb partially carved into a hillside. The construction is primitive, stone slabs, a rectangular niche oriented to the west. No inscriptions, no drawings, only a polished flat surface and a stone threshold. The skeleton inside was laid in a recumbent position. Nearby were a ceramic bowl, a shard of obsidian, and 2 stones placed on either side of the skull. these artifacts were inconsistent with local culture. Analysis revealed that they originated from different regions, one from mainland Southeast Asia, the other from Borneo. The burial site is estimated to date back to the 5th century BC. The tomb itself raised no questions, but the behavior of those who entered it did. During the initial photographic recording, one of the archaeologists experienced intense fear and left the room. 2 days later, another member of the group complained of a sudden loss of strength and described a vibration in his ears. The instruments did not detect any sounds or waves. The third participant became ill at the entrance. He lost consciousness for several seconds, despite having no chronic illnesses. We decided to take some measurements. The electromagnetic background is within normal limits. There is no radiation. The temperature is stable. Humidity is low. The air is clean. No chemical fumes. But every time someone entered the chamber, after 1 or 2 minutes, the person experienced anxiety, worry, or a feeling of pressure in the chest area. This wasn't suggestion. They entered one at a time. Without prior information, the result was repeatable. There were no sound sources, neither mechanical nor natural. Psychologists invited later hypothesized that it might be low-frequency infrasound generated by the structure itself. Such waves are inaudible to the ear, but can cause anxiety, headaches, and a sense of danger. However, no device detected infrasound in the chamber. The walls did not vibrate. The space was absolutely silent. The chamber is domed, with a narrow entrance and a slightly slanted ceiling. This creates a resonance effect even without a sound source. Theoretically, one could feel the pressure. But why does it only occur when one is inside, and not at the entrance? One hypothesis considered was the confined space effect. However, the tomb is quite spacious, about 8 square meters. The lighting is good, and the walls are light. Claustrophobia is ruled out. Furthermore, none of the experiment participants experienced anxiety in other similar chambers. Another peculiarity is the body's position in the burial. It is laid facing the entrance, meaning it looks at the person entering. This is unusual. Bodies are usually oriented along an axis. Here, it is directly facing the observer. Direct visual contact is created, especially if the presumed position of the eye sockets is restored. After the research was completed, the chamber was closed. A fence and an unexplained sign were installed at the site. A year later, the site was filled in. The official reason given was soil erosion. Unofficially, no one wanted to continue working in a place where every second person experienced inexplicable fear. This is not mysticism. This is not a curse. This is a fact of psychological influence. Recorded without sound, without energy, without pressure, only presence. Perhaps the tomb was built on the principle of an acoustic resonator. Perhaps it contains a structure that operates at the level of perception. Or perhaps it is simply a place where someone was once buried improperly. The silence inside this cell is unusual. It's too pure, too complete, as if someone is still trying to say something, but without sound. And everyone who enters hears. A date that appears in different civilizations, in historical chronicles, myths, and the calendar systems of various cultures, from the Mayans to the Sumerians, from the ancient Chinese to Vedic India. One date appears again and again, in different forms, under different names, within different eras, but with the same numerical basis. The Gregorian equivalent of this date is 31 or 13 BC. In the Mayan calendar, this date is considered the beginning of the current world cycle. The long count system counts its beginning from August 11th, 31 to 13 BC. This is not an approximate calculation. This is a specific starting point. In their mythology, this is the moment of the appearance of light, the division of time, the beginning of history that can be written down. In the Vedic tradition, the beginning of Kali Yuga, the era of spiritual decline, is placed in 3102 BCE. A difference of 11 years may seem large, but on the scale of millennia, it's a coincidence. This is especially true when you consider that these two cultures were located on different continents and had no connection with each other. In ancient China, according to one version of the astronomical cycle of the heavenly stems and earthly branches, the current cycle began at approximately the same time interval. In the Sumerian inscriptions found at Nippur, one of the earliest lists of kings begins counting reigns from a period that in astronomical reconstruction also falls at the turn of the 3rd millennium BC. None of these cultures used the Gregorian system. They all had their own forms of counting years, but when reverse calculated and converted into a common scale, they all point to the same starting point. Coincidence? Some believe that this is connected with an astronomical event. Around 3100 BC, a rare parade of planets occurred, coinciding with a change in the Earth's precessional axis. This could have been perceived as a cosmic sign. Visually, it was noticeable across the entire planet. The growth of megalithic architecture begins, from Stonehenge to Jurfel Almar. There is also geophysical evidence. Ice core deposits show a dramatic climate change during this period. Temperatures rose sharply and sea levels rose. This may have been accompanied by changes in rituals, social structure, and the emergence of new forms of writing. But why did this particular date become the basis for the chronology of such different peoples? Proponents of the knowledge transfer concept believe that in prehistoric times, an unknown civilization or group of custodians existed who transmitted some kind of timekeeping system to different cultures, not in the form of numbers, but in the form of events, landmarks, and calendar structures. This kind of synchronization is impossible by chance. Neither climate, nor astronomy, nor cultural processes themselves create a date. Someone chooses a date or inherits it. What's also interesting is that almost all of these cultures associate this moment with a beginning, not an end. The beginning of an era, the beginning of a new humanity, the beginning of a countdown. It feels like they all received the same signal, but interpreted it differently. Perhaps it is simply a convenient reference point, but then why did it arise simultaneously among peoples who had no contact, communication, or common base? To this day, no explanation has been found that satisfies everyone. Some say it's a coincidence. Others say it was borrowed through forgotten intermediaries. Still others say it's memory. It's about an event that isn't directly recorded in any chronicle deaths, but is embedded in the very structure of time. If all this is random, it's too pure. If it's a system, we haven't deciphered it yet. And if it's a starting point, then a starting point of what? History is an attempt to create a logical narrative from fragments. Most of them fit into a system. They can be explained, classified, reduced to known causes. But there are others. Those that persist, although they defy explanation. The 20 stories you just heard aren't directly related. Different continents, different eras, different cultures. But they all have something in common. They don't fit in. They stand apart. Sometimes quietly, sometimes insistently. But always on the edge of comprehension. They don't demand faith. They don't offer theories. They simply exist. In stone, in a tooth, in a shadow, in a sound. Not as riddles, but as reminders that the picture of the world is not yet complete. And what's most important in science is not the answers, but the questions that remain unanswered.